welcome to another weekly update. I hope you're doing well. Hope you had a good week, and looking forward to this one. A couple of things to tell you about in the Microsoft Teams development world and that kind of space. We're going to cover Microsoft Teams, we're going to cover Graph, we're going to cover Azure communication services, and then we're going to loop all the way back around again to Microsoft Teams apps, and just kind of talk about some kind of slightly less technical stuff to do with Microsoft Teams apps as well. So let's get into it. All right, so the first thing that you should know is there's a update to apps in channels, and they are now available for GA. So what is this all about? So Microsoft Teams apps you've been able to use for a while in meetings, but not in channel meetings. And so that's something that's been in preview for a little while. It's just now come to general availability, so that's exciting. So if you've already got an application that works in meetings and you want to bring it to channel meetings, it may just work out of the box. There's a couple of things just to be aware of. So the first of those is that your scope needs to be set in your manifest to support. It needs to be set to the team scope. And then you need to choose one of the meeting contexts. If you've written a meeting app already, you probably already have one of those meeting contexts set, but your scope might not support the team scope. So that's something you can change in your manifest, either by editing the JSON, or you can go and use the editor at the developer portal. A couple of different ways of doing that. Let's just look at this blog post that announced the GA of this kind of channel meetings for Teams apps. What's interesting is that if you do this, the APIs that you use to get channel meeting information will give you slightly different information because it's a channel meeting and not a regular meeting. So you'll get the ID of the channel, the conversation ID will be the channel thread for the meeting. So that, just to be aware of, that could be really useful. But also if you are migrating over an existing meeting app, that could also break your app because it's not expecting an ID that looks like a channel ID, channel thread. They do look slightly different sometimes. So just that to be aware of. Yeah, so there's a whole link that's on the screen off to all the APIs. And then as a user, how do you add apps to channel meetings? This is the kind of stuff that you give to your users once you've done all your integration, you've taken your app and enabled it for channel meetings. Users can then go to the meeting details page and they get the full kind of add app experience there. And you can also do it from within a meeting. All right, so that's kind of exciting. It's good. It's good to kind of see Microsoft filling in the gaps a little bit. There's been some kind of fluidity around some features and them not being available in all places all of the time. So I think this is really nice. It's one of those places where it's good to see them filling in the gaps so that you don't really have to think. If you've written an application for a meeting, then it works in a meeting regardless of where that meeting is. Users don't have to remember, is this a channel meeting? Is this a meeting that started on the calendar? And so I think that's good. It removes that kind of friction around Teams applications. It just makes them easier to use, makes them more readily usable, I suppose, and that's good for adoption. You know, if users get used to using apps and finding them in the places they expect them, they're more likely to use them, and that's good for user adoption. And I feel like that's where Microsoft are going with this as well. They want to drive up user adoption of Teams apps, and so a way to do that is to make them frictionless, and this is one of those areas that makes them frictionless. The other area, and this is not so much to do with Teams apps, but just generally apps on Microsoft 365, the other area where they drive user adoption is by lighting up more functionality for developers, especially kind of, again, going around closing some of those gaps and some of those rough edges. When things get first released, there's often rough edges around capabilities, things that you might expect to be able to do that you can't do. And then over time, Microsoft come along and kind of fill those in. This is one of those, this next thing I want to tell you about, which is to do with Microsoft Graph and the Planner API. So the Planner API now has some new capabilities, and there's a whole blog post about the new capabilities. I think you can sum them up in 2 words: application permissions. So that's good. We talked about application permissions last week, actually, around the to-do API, and now it looks like Planner is following their lead by supporting application permissions. So there's a new set of, they call them a new set of business scenario capabilities to allow integration of external signals and data. I mean, what that means is that you can create tasks and things from outside Planner and create them in the Planner ecosystem, and you can set the external ID, so you can link it back again to your third party, your line of business application or whatever. But the big thing about that is that you've got application permissions to do that. And then also on some of the existing Planner API capabilities, the support for application permissions as well. That's good. We talked a lot about application permissions versus user permissions last week, but in general, it lights up many more applications that can run without the user being present. So run on a timer, run in response to events happening in other systems. And so it really facilitates that kind of integration from your third-party line of business systems into something like Planner. If you wanted to use that to kind of keep them either as a one-time move over or just to keep them synchronized. You want to keep both running, but you want to have a view in Planner of what's happening in your kind of third-party system. You could do that, and you could do that using these APIs. So that's exciting. It's good to see this stuff here. Application permissions are one of those things that it does always kind of slightly annoy me when new features launch and don't have them in, because it is such an obvious thing. I think Microsoft must know by now that the first question that people always have is, what about the application permissions? But it is good that they follow up afterwards. It kind of feels like one of those second wave things where it didn't make the first cut, or it got cut to meet the deadline or whatever, but it is high up on the list for kind of fast follow up, because it does unlock, I would say, a good percentage, a sizable minority, if not the majority of use cases. And I don't have any data to back that up, whereas Microsoft do. And maybe that's why they defer application permissions. Maybe many more people use user permissions than app permissions. I don't know. My experience tends to be I tend to lean more on the application permissions than the user permissions, but that's just me. That might just be the style of applications that I write. They might just tend to be more middle tier, back end, that kind of thing, rather than user facing apps. I don't know. But for me, application permissions are really important, and so it's good to see them. Would I like to see them earlier? Of course, but it's good to see them come out like this. So that's all good. All right, let's talk about something else. We're going to crack through it today and try and get in under 10 minutes, but we'll see how that goes. There's a AMA for specific, a very specific AMA is happening. The specific AMA, which I feel like is going to lead to some confusion, but the AMA is around Azure Communication Services and Microsoft Teams. But the actual AMA is about those two things together, accessing Microsoft Teams from Azure Communication Services, or accessing Azure Communication Services from Microsoft Teams. The two things together. It's not a generalized AMA about Microsoft Teams and Azure Communication Services as two big products that you could ask questions about any of those things. So this isn't the place to bring your generalized Teams questions, or in fact your generalized Azure Communication Services questions. It is your place to bring specific questions about the fusing of Azure Communication Services and Microsoft Teams. So I feel like this is going to be confusing. People are going to ask lots of questions that are not specific to this thing, but if you have specific questions to this thing, there is a live online event happening on March the 8th in 2 days' time. It's happening between 9 and 10 a.m. Pacific, so that's kind of sometime in the afternoon for the UK. But yeah, interesting. It's interesting they're running an AMA at all. I think it's good. I don't know where the AMA is running, but there's a short link on screen. I'll put a link in the notes as well. I imagine it's probably running on the tech community because that's where most of the AMAs tend to run. So if you've got questions or you just want to learn more about that combination of Azure Communication Services and Microsoft Teams, if you want to learn more, go back and look at past videos and blog posts and stuff. But yeah, if you've got specific questions for Microsoft, come to the AMA, and it'll be a good place to kind of ask them. It's interesting as well. I like their screenshot that they've got for this, the image they're using for this. It's kind of cool because I think what they're trying to show is the lady on the right, or the image on the right. The lady is on her phone, and she's probably using Azure Communication Services in the browser. That's something like that. And then the person on the left is very clearly in an office, and you can tell that because he's in the half light and he's wearing a headset and he's got a shirt on. I think he's supposed to be using Microsoft Teams. And I think the idea is you could have Microsoft Teams on one side and Azure Communication Services on the other. And that's the whole point of this product team, and it's the whole point of the AMA. It's something I've talked about quite a lot. I'm talking about coming up actually March the 16th in London at the Reactor, and then somewhere else. Check my speaking page. But yeah, like it's a very powerful integration, this actually, because it unlocks Microsoft Teams for a whole bunch of users outside your organization that won't have Teams licenses and won't use Teams anyway. So your customers, your non-technical customers outside your organization, but they will use a browser. You can reach them over video in that way. So that is interesting and exciting. So if I've whetted your appetite, maybe show up for the AMA or go and look at some previous blog posts I've done. All right, and the last thing I want to tell you about is a useful but new and useful blog post. No, sorry, not page. A page added to the Microsoft Teams docs, to the learn.microsoft.com documentation, all around driving adoption of your Microsoft Teams application. And I thought this was really interesting. I spoke a couple of weeks ago about another page Microsoft did around kind of monetization and keeping users current and all that sort of stuff. This is a similar kind of thing around driving adoption. It's kind of non-technical advice, if you like, for indie developers, but also, anyone really, product managers, around, what to do to kind of get more people using your application. Things to think about before you roll out your application, who's going to have access, understanding how you can drive adoption. And there's 5 steps here that you can go through. Internal enablement, how to get over the speed bumps of working with IT to get your application installed everywhere so it's there for users once you start telling them about it. Things about user awareness campaigns. There's a whole bunch of stuff that if you want your application to be successful, then actually writing the application is only the very first part of it. There's a whole marketing essentially process that you need to go through to get users to understand what your app is, the problems it solves, where they can access it, when it's appropriate to use it, how they get on board with it, where they should go if they get problems, and all that sort of stuff. And so it's good to see Microsoft write this stuff down in a fairly lengthy blog post actually, that covers lots and lots of different things. Like there's lots of really good information in here. So it's worth taking some time and reading through if you have an app. Especially, this is very true for internal apps as well as apps going to the App Store. In fact, I'd say it's even more true for internal apps in a way, because external apps in the App Store are going to get found by people searching to solve their problems. Whereas internally to an organization, I feel like people, there's many more people inside an application who couldn't care less what a Teams app is and are not going to go to the App Store and search for it. They need to be told that there is something that can solve the problem that they're having right now, and it's called a Teams app, and this is how they can get it and how they can use it. And I think internal enablement and internal adoption is super important for Teams apps, and I don't think there's enough of it. So I think posts like this that are chocked full of really useful information are really valuable. I think it's really good. I think everyone should read it and probably refer to it like regularly as well, because it's not really a one and done either, because obviously people join and leave your organization. Your app changes over time in its capabilities and what it can do. So I think it's always worth coming back to. All right, that's it from me for interesting things, I think, to leave you with this week. I hope it's been useful. Let me know in the comments. And I will talk to you again next time.